Mayor Buttigieg, you say Senator Warren has been, quote, evasive about how she's going to pay for Medicare for all. What's your response?
Well, we heard it tonight, a yes or no question that didn't get a yes or no answer. Look, this is why people here in the Midwest are so frustrated with Washington in general and Capitol Hill in particular. Your signature, Senator, is to have a plan for everything, except this. No plan has been laid out to explain how a multi-trillion-dollar hole in this Medicare for All plan that Senator Warren is putting forward is supposed to get filled in. And the thing is, we really can deliver health care for every American and move forward with the boldest, biggest transformation since the inception of Medicare itself. But the way to do it without a giant multi-trillion-dollar hole and without having to avoid a yes or no question is Medicare for all who want it. We take a version of Medicare, we let you access it if you want to, and if you prefer to stay on your private plan, you can do that too. That is what most Americans want. Medicare for all who want it, trusting you to make the right decision for your health care and for your family, and it can be delivered without an increase
Senator,
on
your
middle-class
response?
taxes.
So let's be clear. Whenever someone hears the term Medicare for all who want it, understand what that really means. It's Medicare for all who can afford it.
Elizabeth Warren said this at the Democratic debates, and I've made the point here that she argues her case for Medicare for all extremely well, meaning when her and Sanders were on the debate stage, she argued extremely well. But I also said she was never for Medicare for all. And what Pete and many of the other ones notice, she's never really solid on this. I mean, Sanders is talking about a bill, but she's talking about this stuff in theory. And even though I strongly suspect they knew she wasn't really for it, they still kept hitting her on it over and over and over again. Ribbing her on this notion of you have a plan for everything, but you don't have a plan for this. Warren's political instincts suck. Despite being on a debate stage and telling Pete Buttigieg that Medicare for all who want it is effectively Medicare for all who can afford it, she takes Pete's care. Meaning when Warren put out her plan was effectively Pete Buttigieg's plan. Medicare for all who can afford it, by her own words. I mean, ultimately, Warren is trying to tell people she's being too cute for her own good, that I am going to put through a public option first. And then, in the next Congress, 3 years later, after all the energy has been sapped out of the political space in order to bite the apple again, then I'm going to push through Medicare for all. And I would imagine that the immigration policy has to be done because that's part of her paying for it. And I would imagine what's the other policy? The cutting the military budget has to be done. Something that she herself backed, even under Trump. She wasn't being serious. She was never being serious on Medicare for all. And I've told you that from day one. It wasn't magic. You just look at her incentives and you look at the stuff she said prior. And it never came across as if she was really for it. My point is this. Elizabeth Warren has had a bad week. She has had a bad week, and that's to put it mildly. From a polling standpoint, her energy has been sapped. It's like, are we at peak Warren? She doesn't seem to move in the polls anymore. Sanders, Harris poll just came out. Number 2 spot, 18%. Warren dropped to 3rd. Morning consult. Biden, amazing lead at 32%, but Sanders, 20%. He's back in the number 2 spot. YouGov, Iowa, Sanders and Biden, number 1 spot. My point is, from a polling standpoint, and Reuters poll, Sanders, number 1 spot. Sanders has been getting a surge. Warren has plateaued. I mean, even when you look at the polling thing, you can see her numbers just kind of plateaued. It's fascinating to watch. That's not positive for her. This is also coming at the time where Buttigieg is getting a bump in the polls. And it looks like Buttigieg may be potentially eating into Warren's momentum. Let's call it that way, because it's not momentum anymore. On top of that, having to put out the Medicare for All plan hurt. It hurt. I said from day one that Warren was not for Medicare for all. And fact of the matter is, even her own campaign comes out and says that Warren is not for Medicare for all. Washington Post breaks this. a person who's part of Warren's campaign, it wasn't really clear that we were going to be spending the fall drilling down into details, an unnamed source close to the campaign told the Washington Post. They thought that they would just be able to attach themselves on the Bernie Sanders plan and just say, we're with Bernie, and argue Medicare for all in theory, this kind of esoteric thing. They didn't realize that they would have to end up coming out with an actual plan. Now, when they put the numbers out to the plan, I said, she's not being serious. And then she puts out the plan itself and you're like, aha. She thinks that people are so stupid to believe that she's going to be able to get a mandate Congress, get them to pass a public option, and then turn around 3 years later with an entirely new Congress that historically is weaker in that Congress, meaning the president loses seats in that Congress, and get that Congress to pass Medicare for all. It's a plan designed to fail. Now, this is not a big deal if you went from the beginning like Pete and said, I'm for Pete's care. Fair enough. Pete's care. Gabbard, I'm for single payer plus. Fair enough. People can evaluate your plan and they can evaluate these other parts of your policies when people know what those things are. But that's not what she did. She ran for like 3 months on this notion of Medicare for all, breaking the hearts of many Warren supporters when they finally put out the plan, and it's Pete's plan. It's Pete's plan. Right just from that, I saw supporters angry at her. If you're looking at the Twitter stuff and those people are like, God, I can't support this. Or they felt tricked. Essentially, you had a situation where she was pushing for one thing and then you come to find out it's something else. One of the other things it noted was that the other candidates started to peel away, meaning Pete Buttigieg abandoned it, Kamala Harris abandoned it, many of the other campaigns abandoning it, leaving just her and Sanders. And her political instincts, because she was being ribbed remorselessly from Biden, from Klobuchar, and even from Buttigieg, that you're the person with a plan for everything, but you don't have a plan for the most important thing in this election. And just like being ribbed by Donald Trump, she went to get a Native American test and found out she wasn't Native American. Surprise. And on this, she gets her staff to put out a plan in short notice. And then the plan gets picked apart. And then when she finally comes out with her healthcare plan, she tries to explain to people that what is effectively is Pete's care is somehow synonymous with Medicare for all. Typically, this takes place after the primary, where the electorate is stuck with the person, and that person is tacking back to the right. Warren did all of this within a few months. That's not good. That's not good. This gets worse. She has to deal with this. Come to find out that there is apparently rich people organizing to support Warren, particularly her campaign in Iowa. Listen to Warren. She's asked about, hey, what's going on with this kind of group of money working for you in Iowa, or working as almost like a PAC for you in Iowa?
You haven't seen it. Your campaign has. There was a dark money group that placed an ad in the Des Moines Register for you, praising you for not taking corporate or super PAC money. What was your reaction when you first heard it out? And couldn't the argument be made that dark money is more problematic than super PACs because they don't have to disclose their donors, and you've hit Joe Biden hard?
Warren is being asked about dark money that is pushing ads for her in Iowa. Now, she was supposed to be against all of this stuff, meaning this wasn't supposed to happen since.
So I don't know anything about it. I haven't seen anything about it.
You haven't seen it. Your campaign hasn't asked them to
No one's
not.
told me about it.
Your
So I don't know
campaign
anything
waited
about
on
it. So I haven't seen it. Okay.
She says, I know nothing about this. I know nothing about this. Nobody told me about it. They were just running those ads. My campaign hasn't said anything about it. Okay, fair enough. Campaign hasn't said anything about it. What about this? What about this? What about this? Do you know about this? Inside Warren's secret big donor fan club, Warren's campaign treasurer, Paul Ergemon, and his finance co-director, Shanti Fry, are key links between the senator and big Democratic donors. Now, the point that they make is Warren has sworn off of this stuff. However, elements of her staff has not. Right? Elizabeth Warren prohibits special access for big donors, but her campaign treasurer and another close ally are organizing wealthy supporters for Warren behind the scenes while she rips the rich. Erdogan, her campaign treasurer, is a prolific political donor himself, and the wealthy supporters Erdogan and Fry are organizing today may have another act to play in Warren's campaign. If she became the nominee, those donors may help finance the National Democratic Party, which can collect six-figure sums, and which Warren has said she would raise money for if chosen as a nominee, or help super PACs that would support Warren against President Trump. I kept telling you she's magnificently disingenuous. That's kind of my point. That's been the point that I've made this entire time. She can't be trusted. Just because she takes a position doesn't necessarily mean she won't find ways to get around this position. In this very specific case, the Democratic Party saying, I will raise money for the Democratic Party. Who will the Democratic Party be working in tandem with? They will be working in tandem with Warren. Her getting those big checks there's not that much difference between the two. That's my point. That was the point I made from day one. And you find out that her campaign is working behind the scenes to organize that big money. She wants that big money. And again, she was working with Clinton from day one. All of this stuff, she's doing this stuff in tactical fashion in order to get around problems that she's having. One problem, I need money in order to run this campaign. And these lefties are out here angry at people for taking money because they believe that money puts strings and tethers into that person. I need a way to get around that. This was her way of getting around that. I need to stand beside Sanders and say, I also am not taking money in the primary or in the general, because the first position that she had, where she would take it in the general but not the primary, looked utterly ridiculous. But that's kind of my point. It's disingenuous. Sanders doesn't take money out of principle. She's taking money out of political tactics. There's a difference in those things. And one last point. This position, especially from the standpoint of the left, is entirely untenable.
Very much. Quick to turn to some foreign policy, if that's okay.
I'm ready.
Okay. So there is a humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. People are literally starving to death. Hospitals don't have like gauze or Band-Aids, like the most basic supplies.
Yep.
The Trump administration has recognized the National Assembly President Juan Guaido as the president and encouraged a bunch of other countries to follow suit. And frankly, what was a pretty impressive diplomatic play by them. He also sanctioned Venezuela's oil industry, which is a major step, which could cut off all their supply of dollars and their ability to, have an economy. Do you agree with those two steps, recognizing Guaido and the sanctions on the oil sector? And if so, I mean, how do we back up a step as bold as saying there's a new president and it's this guy that we named, especially given our history in Latin America?
So I want to broaden this one out just
Please.
a little bit. Start with the fact that Maduro is obviously a dictator. He's terrible. He's stolen this election. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for the people of Venezuela. So that's part one. Part two, this notion of using our...
Just so we're clear, the sanctions, I'm going to let this play out. But this is extraordinary. The sanctions that we were putting on Venezuela, Obama comes out and said that Venezuela is a national security risk. Nobody asked, how? How is Venezuela a national security risk to us? How? George Bush tried to take out Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez wasn't a dictator. He was elected over and over and over again. In fact, he was so popular that the people went running into the streets in order to drag him from being executed. Bush was involved in that. Then even our media came up and was able to say, yeah, the Bush administration was involved in this. Not to mention Clinton taking out the guy in Honduras. We have a history of Latin America, in regards to South America, in regards to us either toppling governments and putting in outright dictators, something like Pinochet, taking out Allende, or working for corporate interests in order to help those companies get their hands on the resources of the various countries. Even if what you say about Maduro is true, why is it your business? Why is it your business? Why does Elizabeth Warren believe it is her business on what takes place in Venezuela? And Donald Trump, and even this guy says, yeah, it's pretty ballsy to just say this guy's president, wasn't elected into a pie shop and yet you're going to call the guy president. Let me tell you this. My belief that Maduro didn't win the election has just been essentially eviscerated by seeing what is taking place in Bolivia. The guy wins the election whole hog. The OAS comes out after being asked to invalidate the election. They do just that. And Western media just runs with it. Bam. This guy, this is perfectly okay. My point is, this propaganda that the guy's a dictator, the guy wasn't elected, the guy's this, the guy's that. This is not a rah-rah Maduro. It's more so that this is none of our goddamn business. It's none of our business. We and these sanctions have been killing tens of thousands of human beings. Sanctions are an act of war. If you look back at what took place from the standpoint of Iraq with Bill Clinton putting those sanctions on, there's a video where Madeleine Albright is asked, 500,000 kids died because of the sanctions that you put on their country. Do you believe that was necessary? Madeleine Albright, very comfortable, probably sipping a latte, will get a pedicure when she leaves, says, yes, I think those sanctions were absolutely necessary. Think about what I just said. 500,000 kids died. In this case, this is outright us instigating ourselves into affair of another nation, working with one of the elements of opposition party, one of our patsies, that is going to essentially sell off the resources of Venezuela. That's what this is about. Chavez wasn't a dictator. Bush still wanted to get his ass out of office. Leftist governments, typically, especially anti-imperialist governments, run afoul of the U.S. influence. If Elizabeth Warren is going to sit here and say it is the United States' right to choose who those darkists put in power, this should be disqualifying. I'm going to let her finish. But let's just be very clear. It is not our right to intervene into the affairs of another nation. We may take this notion of a Monroe Doctrine, but that Monroe Doctrine, for the most part, means that those people are lesser and they have, for some reason, should be subjugated by us. I find that to be disturbing. Nearly 100,000 people have died in that country because of those sanctions. What this guy was saying here in the beginning, all of that stuff, are related to sanctions. They're related to sanctions. You're effectively saying, oh God, those people are hungry and starving and they can't get medication, they can't get drugs, they can't get blah, 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 blah. Hey, by the way, do you agree with the sanctions? That is doing that. He doesn't make the connection between the sanctions and the other items. He makes it as if these things are just taking place and Trump has put sanctions on them. No, the sanctions is important. What is taking place in Venezuela is none of our business. And beyond it being none of our business, we are making it worse. There is no reason for the opposition to ever come to terms with the government of the country when the United States is essentially working with the opposition to create all sorts of strife and chaos in the country, not to mention trying to make it economically implode. Why would the opposition work with the government of the country at that point? All of these incentives are bad. And all of these things are being pushed forward for an imperialist foreign policy that the United States is enacting in Venezuela to make that government knuckle under. Acknowledging Guaido, some random guy that nobody knew that went out in public screaming for a revolution and nobody came out. That guy is the one that she is going to say should be in power. I find this to be extraordinary. This should be disqualifying.
Diplomatic tools, I'm all for it. I think recognition, I think getting our allies to do it, it's a way to bring diplomatic pressure. Economic sanctions, yeah, I support economic sanctions, but now we're going to start, we got to turn the dial some here. We have to offer humanitarian help at the same time. We can't let people starve. It doesn't matter that Maduro's willing to let his own people starve. So, for example, let me pick one that's at least a little easier to deal with. A lot of people are fleeing the country.
Yeah.
And that means they're loading up around the borders, the country.
Come on. Think about what she just said for the moment. Does that even make sense? Does it make sense? We are putting through sanctions that are starving human beings. She says, yeah, I agree with Trump on this. Trump and Biden and Pompeo, Abrams. Abrams was convicted by Congress for lying to Congress. The guy was involved in running kill squads in South America, in El Salvador and Nicaragua, if I'm not mistaken. She agrees with these guys. I don't know why it's Elizabeth Warren's business what takes place in Venezuela. I'm astonished by that perspective, especially from the standpoint of somebody who's considering themselves a lefty. And to go further on that point, whatever Warren thinks of what is taking place in Venezuela, it is none of her business. And she said, we can't let people starve. What does she think sanctions are doing? And she's like, we should offer humanitarian aid. What are you talking about? Like, you're essentially starving a country to death and then saying, but we should send in bread because I don't want people to starve to death. Does Liz Warren not know that the sanctions are starving people to death? Does Liz Warren not know that the Bush administration has tried to topple Venezuela during Chavez's period? And I'm sorry, you can't call Chavez a dictator. Meaning it has nothing to do with the dictator nonsense. For fuck's sake, Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship. We had no issue putting in dictators in the various countries around the globe. The issue is not the dictatorship nonsense. The issue is they want to get their hands on those resources. Either Warren doesn't know this or Warren does know this. And in either of these cases, I consider this to be outright disqualifying. I would love to hear her opinion on Bolivia. In fact, I know her opinion on Bolivia. She responded, Bolivia, right here. The Bolivian people deserve free and fair elections as soon as possible. Bolivia's interim leadership must limit itself to preparing for early, legitimate election. Bolivia's security forces must protect demonstrators, not commit violence against them. Are you serious? What are you talking about? There was a free and fair election. There was a free and fair election. What are you talking about? It's a coup. You can't call a coup a coup. What is with these people that dance around the term of a military coup? Bernie did it. You typically ape him. This notion, they're killing people in the streets. You have a fascist government that takes power, is literally killing people in the streets. You have the indigenous population that is pushing back against the fact that a fascist government is taking power because they know their lives are on the line. The people who were part of the OAS that invalidated that election, I would strongly argue, at the behest of the United States, even they call it a coup. But the lefty, supposedly the lefty, she can't do that. She can't do that. Free and fair elections. They had a free and fair election. The leadership within the country even agreed to another election. What are you talking about? Like, I find her to be utterly and entirely disqualifying. Both of these. In fact, all of these. It reeks of just being dishonest. Not just dishonest. I don't even know if Elizabeth Warren knows anything about foreign policy. I strongly suspect her thing was, I just want to hit banks, but I want to get in power, so I'm just going to ape Sanders. Here's the catch, and I'll leave it at this. Her issue is going to be the debates. Whatever she thinks of how bad her week has gotten. I've seen people look at these comments and say, yeah, I'm done. I've seen people who backed Warren, what's a guy named Stoller, who went after lefties because they were attacking her Medicare for All plan, looked at what she said in Bolivia and Venezuela. I'm done. I'm done. I've seen other people saying, yeah, I'm with Sanders. And one person said, the late minute, man, it sucks because I really liked Warren. I really liked Warren. Her issue is going to be the debates. And when she gets on that debate stage, there's going to be blood in the water. She has put out a Medicare for All plan. The foreign policy stuff may or may not apply. It depends on if it comes up. Sanders is not going to call Bolivia. He's going to call it a coup, and he may go after people who say otherwise. But Medicare for All is going to be the thing that drags Elizabeth Warren down. Her viability as a candidate is going to entirely depend on whether or not she can withstand the barrage that she is going to get from Klobuchar, Buttigieg, and Biden. And believe it or not, Sanders, she has done herself a disservice in making this a policy discussion, which Sanders would engage in. He will make the argument that I am going to put Medicare in one shot. He may even make the argument that trying to do it in two goes is unworkable, even if he wouldn't necessarily hit her on this notion of her being disingenuous about Medicare for All. No, Biden will do that. Biden will do that. Pete Buttigieg may even say, ultimately, this is just Pete's care. You've essentially taken my healthcare plan. And he may even point to the debate where you repeating what she told him Medicare for All who want it. He may call her disingenuous. You've ran on Medicare for all of these months when really the only thing that you wanted to put through was Medicare for some. Pete's care. You must understand, just because Sanders wouldn't do it, the other competitors in the race, especially Buttigieg, who knows that him and Warren are sipping from the same pot in regards to the electorate, and Biden, who wants to put her down because he does consider her somewhat of a threat, will go after her on this. Klobuchar, who is angry and mean to her staff, will definitely be angry and mean to Elizabeth Warren. I don't really care what the rest of the people in the race. I don't know what Tulsi is going to do on this front. Who knows? Tulsi may say, you're being disingenuous about your healthcare plan. I support single payer plus, or whatever that is. I guess my point is, her issue and her viability is going to have to deal with all of these people going after her. And this is not with her rising the polls like it was in the last debate. Meaning this is not her with momentum. This is her stagnant, if not tilting downward and getting hit in the process. If she can withstand that barrage and if she can counterattack, she may be viable as a candidate. If she cannot, and if she starts to look bad and she starts to look disingenuous and dishonest and those type of things, and if they keep hitting her on this note of this, you got to be honest, you got to be honest, you got to be honest. The way Biden talks about it, you got to be honest with the American public. These numbers don't work. These numbers are fudgy. These numbers are going to create disincentives. You're being dishonest about your healthcare plan. You're really for a public option while pushing a Medicare for all. This may look bad for her tomorrow. She brought it all on herself. It's one thing if Elizabeth Warren ran as a candidate who was for a public option, who cared about just doing the bank stuff, and the other stuff she was more hazy on. If she was, her main thing was, I want to put it to the banks. I want to stick it to Wall Street. She's credible on that front. Everybody believes that. If she would have said public option, that's essentially what she ended up on anyway. My point is, a lot of this has to do with a certain degree of disingenuousness that just reeks off of her. I'm not going to take money in the primary because I want to stand beside Sanders as a 1-to-1. That's the honest truth. Not whatever she came up with. The dumping money from her Senate account into her other account. Again, that's her trying to skate around a position in order to look like Sanders when Sanders is already just there. And the Medicare for All thing is a fruit of the poisonous tree. I mean, ultimately, it's the same thing. All of these things are ultimately, at their core, the exact same thing. A candidate that is disingenuously trying to get over the finish line through the primary by aping the other person in the race. And at this point, her mask has come off. Sanders was right. He took her out to the deep end, and she started to drown. We will see tomorrow whether Warren is viable as a candidate. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical. I mean, maybe the debate team tries to help her out, meaning they don't necessarily, they protect her. I don't know. But Warren is going to have a lot to answer for putting out all of the stuff right now, at this very moment. She would have made better time just saying, I'm with Sanders, and just rode that boat till the wheels came off. She didn't do that. And so tomorrow, in the debate, she's going to have a lot to answer for. This video has gone magnificently long. So I'm going to end this here because I have the radio show today and I have 1 or 2 items that I want to get to. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.